Voter ID. I know this is a very dense slide. I'm going to try to summarize it a bit. So most states, 35 of them, require some ID at the polls. There is wide variation in what is sufficient ID, and there are, of course, some states that do not require ID. There is no state, 0 states, that offer only one option. Every single state in America either does not require ID or has multiple options. That means there's no reason for an election official or a poll worker to ever ask a voter for a driver's license per se, because there is no state that requires a driver's license. Every state has multiple options. And it's probably the case that most people who are asked to present voter ID use a driver's license because most people have it. But millions of legitimate voters do not have driver's licenses. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Nobody, not an election official, not a poll worker, nobody has the right, even if they're acting in good faith, to make voting or imply that voting is a little bit harder than it actually is. And by the way, even if the individual voter has a driver's license, still, if you ask a voter for a driver's license and they present it, they might go out into the world and tell other people they asked me for a driver's license at the polls, and someone who doesn't have a driver's license might think, oh, well, I don't have that, I can't vote. And there are reasons that an election official or a poll worker might not realize that that's a bad thing and do it, trying to do the right thing. It's just, they don't think it through. Because sometimes it's easier to read a name off of an ID rather than ask the voter to say it and say it again and spell it, but it's still, nobody should be implying that ID requirements are stricter than they are. Also, expand your idea of what an ID can be, because in most states, even the ones that have ID, there are a lot of things like utility bills that can suffice as ID. Again, not everywhere, but in many states, even if you don't have a regular ID. And again, even in the strictest voter ID states, there are alternatives. For example, I believe every voter ID state will accept a US passport. Generally, in voter ID states, they will ask you to present either something showing your name and photo or something showing your name and registered voting address. There are some states where if you don't have either of those things, there are longer options. There are some states where you can sign an affidavit in lieu of any form of ID, and there are some states where you can't. The key issue here is if you're in a voter ID state, the question should be, do you have an ID? And if the voter doesn't immediately present one, then the poll worker or election official or whoever, or you as an observer, if you're an observer, if that's what you're doing, anyone who's around, should make sure the voter understands the extent of their options, because they may not have a driver's license, but they might have something else that can suffice, whether they have it on their person, or they can pull it up on a phone, some states allow that, or maybe they have it in their car. But if they have it, if they don't need to go out to a car, they shouldn't be asked to go out to a car to show something.